Ladies and gentlemen, after this inspiring introduction, let us go over to the first book launch on today's agenda. I would like to now invite Dr. Gautam Ghoshal to come to the podium for the launch of his work, The Deliverance, and give a short introduction about it. I would like to remind the audience that all the books relevant to today's session can be found for consultation right behind you upstairs at the table and at Kalakendra, Bharat Nivas for purchase, including several copies of the book which Dr. Gautam Ghoshal is about to present.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
This book was translated by Dilip Kumar Roy, who was close to Sri Aurovill. Sri Aurovill called him my friend and my son. And Sri Aurovill revised the translation. And why was Sri Aurovill so fond of Sharat Chandra Chatterjee, who is the vital writer, basically, as he said? Because as Sri Aurovill was also fond of Shakespeare, because the world which he wants to transform is the world which you see in Sharat Chandra's novels. That makes him so relevant, and Sri Aurovill was impressed by his power of storytelling and the exact projection of the crisis in the human vital in our families. That's all about Sharat Chandra Chatterjee and why Sri Aurovill was so fond of him. And it was, of course, encouraged by Rabindranath Tagore. So 3 people were involved. In fact, 4 if you take the novelist. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ghoshal. May I now call upon Dr. Ananda Reddy and Dr. Sharani Mondal Ghoshal to come to the podium for the next session dedicated to the future of poetry and Savitri. The moderator of the session will be Dr. Gautam Ghoshal. The biodatas of our speakers today you can find in the festival brochures.
Anuradha, please check your mic. Please check your mic if it is working. So we have with us Dr. Ananda Reddy, who needs no introduction. He is so eminent, and he has written profusely on Sri Aurobindo's major texts, and he has lectured in India and abroad. And I am fascinated by his speech. He can speak in Telugu, he can speak in Bengali, he can speak in Hindi, and he can speak in English. I was fascinated in Baroda when he was doing that, and we are traveling together. And now I go to Sharani first because the theory part is very important and not quite well illustrated, explained by the many PhD theses that you see. Because people send it to me because I don't fail. Because the mother was said to Satan, I give it to you, write whatever you like, but never fail. So that is why people send the thesis to me. But I think a very clear explanation of the theory is needed. And I think Sharani is fit for that.
to be a part of this literature festival, and I'm just privileged because I'm sharing the space with two of my teachers, and I'm still their student. Thank you.
Questions. So let me put questions to Dr. Shalini. By future poetry, do you mean the book or the entire theory of Sri Aurobindo's poetry?
Thank you. By the future poetry, I don't mean the book. I mean the poetics, the poetry of the future. Because the future poetry is still incomplete as a book. And in order to understand Sri Aurobindo's poetics, the poetry of the future, we have to consider the future poetry and the letters on poetry, literature, and art. So he began writing the future poetry as a review of James Cousin's New Ways in English Literature. And the essays of the future poetry were serialized in ARIA in 32 installments from 1917 to 1920. And what Cousin says in New Ways in English Literature, that the poetry of the future will be subjective utterance. And he also talked of inward turn. So Sri Aurobindo picks up that too. Now let us move to the letters. So in the letters written to K.D. Sedna, he is more elaborate in his discussion. Maybe the format, because the letter is written in a conversational tone, whereas the future poetry, as a researcher, this is my conjecture, that the review format is a little different from the letters. And the essays of the future poetry underwent several revisions, and Sri Aurobindo was not willing to publish them. So it came out in the book form after his passing. And then the thing that I need to mention, that the overhead aesthetics. So there is no reference to overhead aesthetics in the future poetry. He explains the planes of consciousness, higher mind, illumine mind, intuition, overmind in the letters. And the reference to overhead aesthetics is also evident in the Life Divine. So in order to understand his poetics, we have to consider the letters written to Setna and future poetry in Life Divine. And recently I came across another very interesting essay that I need to mention, the national value of art. So that was published in the first volume of, that has been anthologized, the first volume of complete works. There Sri Aurobindo talks about rasa theory. So we have to actually consider the major texts, and also the first essay of the human cycle, where that is entitled The Cycle of Society. So all these taken together, we understand his poetics. And let me elaborate upon his poetics. So for Sri Aurobindo, Kavi is a seer. He's a seer of life, or drashta. He's a visionary. And the poetry, according to Sri Aurobindo, is a rhythmic voyage of self-discovery. It's not a nautch girl of intellectual mind. It's not a nautch girl of fancy. And the poetry of vision, poetry of incantation, or the mantric poetry, it originates in the heart of a seer who sees life and sings. So there are two essays in the future poetry. The first one, the essence of poetry, and the second one is also very important, that is the ideal spirit of poetry. So these two essays are extremely important to understand what Sri Aurobindo means by the poetry of the future. So in the first essay, the essence of poetry, he says that a rhythmic word combines sound value and sense value. And so, at some points in the same essay he writes sound value and thought value. So sense and thought have been used interchangeably. And sound value and sense value or thought value culminate into soul value. Because it's soul's realization. The poetry of the future should have soul value. And let us go back to the ancient aesthetics a bit. Like Abhinavagupta had talked about its sound value and sense value, but they did not mention the soul value part, which is Sri Aurobindo's addition to the poetics. And also, we have to refer to Rasa theory of Bharat Muni as well. Because in the Rasa theory, Bharat Muni had talked about 8 rasas. After that, Shantam Rasa was introduced by Abhinavagupta. He's a letter theorist. But Sri Aurobindo talks about Akhanda Rasa. So all these rasas will culminate into a whole by virtue of poet's progressive realization. By his evolution of consciousness, he will see a harmonious whole. Because a poet has a cosmic vision. He is one of us, and cosmic consciousness is also a feature of Sri Aurobindo's poetry of the future. So all these rasas culminate into Akhanda Rasa, and all our conflicts, conflicts of surface being at one point in life get resolved. And that was there in the message in Savitri today morning also, that finally we look for a harmony, we look for a whole, and that gives us this pure ananda, the bliss. And for Akhanda Rasa, Sri Aurobindo has used a word, unalloyed bliss, unabridged bliss. So that is more important. So these are his originality as a critic.
And what are the 5 sons of poetry?
Yeah, I will explain. Before that, I just want to mention Aristotle a bit. Because in order to understand his poetics, we have to remember that he integrates the Western and the Indian tradition, Orient and the Occident. So we have to, he's a synthesizer. Now, what we often say that poetry elevates our consciousness. So poetry elevates our egoistic impulses to a greater height. Now that actually relates to Aristotle's poetics, because Aristotle talks about purgation of emotion, catharsis. So good poetry will elevate our consciousness to that level. So he combines the Aristotelian poetics as well as our rasa theory, Abhinavagupta, all are there in his poetry. So he is so complete, so integral, and that fascinates us as researchers. As Professor Ghoshal has mentioned, the 5 sons. So what are these 5 sons? The 5 sons are life, truth, beauty, delight, and spirit. So by life, let me start with truth. So by truth, he says that it's not the intellectual truth, it is intuitive truth. Ananda knows, Professor Ghoshal also taught me this. So intuitive truth, it is not the truth of cultivated intelligence. So it is a realization of truth. And this truth symbolizes goddess Aditi. Now let us fit this into his poetic scheme. Savitri is a symbol of cosmic feminine. Then there is Anis Angelis. Anis Angelis is a heroine of his play, The Vizies of Basura, which is a mingle drama. People call it comedy, but I say it's a mingle drama because it has both elements of tragedy as well as elements of comedy. Because our life is a mixed, our life has both, it's comic as well as tragic. So Vizies of Basura is a very interesting play, and where the Anis Angelis, the protagonist, she is a prelude to Savitri. And she's also the cosmic mother, or the mother spirit, Aditi. And then we have Asia, the heroine of Shelley's Prometheus Unbound. She's also embodying the spirit of the mother goddess. Then in Whitman, we have the reference to ma femme. So ma femme is cosmic feminine. So that is truth. So the poetry should embody that, should reflect that. Then comes life. A poet is not divorced from life. He is one of us. He sees life and he's a channel. he adds beauty and delight to our life. Whatever the poet sees, he transmutes our experiences of pain, misery, and he presents and adds beauty to it. When he presents those experiences in the form of poetry, he adds beauty to it. And he takes delight in life, because that's why we have sentences in Sri Aurobindo's sonnets and poetry that I have wrapped the wide world in my wider self. So that's his cosmic consciousness, and he's one of us. I mean, the poet is one of us. He sees our life, he observes, and then he transmutes his experiences into the form of beauty. And beauty and delight, he takes delight and presents them in the form of beauty. And let us remember Keats's line from Ode on Aggression, that beauty is truth, truth, beauty. Then comes spirit. So spirit is, of course, supra-rational intellect, that is intuition. So the poet sees through his, our poet's intellect is intuitive, not intellectual. And it's his realization. So Sri Aurobindo's poet is a visionary, and he's an intuitive seer.
Well, last question to you. Do you think the future poetry and the latest are enough to know Sri Aurobindo's theory of poetry? People should not read his other books?
I partially mentioned that we have to go through Life Divine, we have to read Human Cycle, and the early cultural writings. And the early cultural writings, those essays were written between 1890 to 1920. And in 1970, the essays were serial. He began serializing in James Cousin's book. And one more thing I think I should explain, that we commonly say, we popularly say, even in my thesis also I claim long back, some 15 years ago, that future poetry is a review of James Cousin's New Ways in English Literature. So I am now deconstructing that. I have started deconstructing it. Like, it's not just the single book which triggered his interest. There are, we have to consider Arthur Symons, the symbolist movement in literature. And that was published in 1899. So what Arthur Symons says, that there can't be literature without symbol. Language is symbolic, words are symbols. So that was Arthur Symons' claim in the symbolist movement in literature. And he writes to Setna in 1936 that symbol speaks the truth in one letter. That's the first sentence. I think it was written in August, 8th August 1936, in a letter to Setna. Now, Savitri is a symbolic epic. And how did Savitri, everybody knows that it was a 600 lines anecdote, which when he started expanding the names, when he started revealing the symbols, it became the longest blank verse epic in the English language, containing 23,813 lines.
What about Whitman?
Yes, thank you. Whitman was one of his favorite poets, and he refers to Walt Whitman quite a few times in the future poetry. And he calls Whitman a broad-souled titan, because a poet should have a broad soul to embrace all, because a poet should not discriminate. And Whitman wrote an essay in 1881, and that was entitled The Poetry of the Future. And I believe, as a researcher, that could have been one of the influences, apart from Cousin's New Ways in English Literature. And in that essay, what Whitman says, that poetry is not the exterior but the interior, not the macrocosm but the microcosm. So inward turn, a subjectivized utterance. So all these together worked as a kind of trigger point behind Sri Aurobindo's The Future Poetry. Thank you very much, sir.
So that shows a great critical tradition in Sri Aurobindo. He did not fall from the sky. We tend to believe that Sri Aurobindo started imagining things, and there's a long tradition. No writer can become a great writer or creative writer if there is no tradition behind him. Sri Aurobindo recreated the old traditions, and both from the West and the East. And now we come to Dr. Ananda Reddy, who is a great exponent of the Life Divine, and Savitri. Over to Ananda. A question, yes. I forget. Because you are such a great figure that I forgot to question. Well, what is the difference between the Savitri of the Mahabharata and Sri Aurobindo's Savitri? If you could explain for the audience.
Yeah, I think this question has been dealt by writers like Dr. Nathkarni, Deshpande, R.Y. Deshpande. Because this is what people are interested in. That why is it that Sri Aurobindo chose this topic first of all? Because apparently it is a very simple story. And then if he has chosen this, what differences has it brought in? I think I'll tell you a little bit about why he has chosen, because before I come to the differences, we should know what is it that made Sri Aurobindo take up this story. Because in simple terms, it is, everybody in India especially, we have this Savitri Puja and all that. Savitri has become a socio-religious symbol about the chastity of a woman, how to be faithful, etc. But Sri Aurobindo writes in the beginning in one of his letters, he says, in the Mahabharata, Savitri originally was greatly symbolic. It's not just a story for the sake of the story, it's a symbolic story. And I feel Sri Aurobindo got attracted to symbolism more than the legend. Because if you see the legend, it has some parallels to some other stories also. For example, we have Sri Aurobindo writing Urvashi, and also the Love and Death. Interestingly, both these poems, long poems, were written before Savitri. So if I put them together, Urvashi, Love and Death and Savitri, I see one common streak going through all of them. That is his passion for love and death, the theme of love and the theme of death. That is to say, right from the beginning, he was looking for this solution to death. And let us remember, it's a very significant thing. The poem may be small, Urvashi and Love and Death, but Sri Aurobindo was looking deeper. What is the deeper thing? That can love conquer death? The simple thing. And imagine it was in 1896 that he wrote this Urvashi. Later he comes in, within 2 years he comes to this Love and Death. But he says in Urvashi, what happens? The young lovers, the wife dies. In Urvashi, the wife, there's a question of, the wife says, wife is the Apsara, Urvashi, from the Indraloka. When she falls in love with Pururavas, the condition for the marriage is, Urvashi says, that I've got 2 little rams with me, I would like to keep it with you, but they must be safe. And secondly, she says, you should never show me your naked body. So the conditions are accepted. And so they live happily until it seems Indra is bored without Urvashi in his palace. You see. He wants to get back Urvashi. So there is some kind of mischievous thing that he sends a thunder. And in that thunder, the rams are stolen away. And Urvashi says, wakes up Puranvas and saying, look, there is something happening. And he was sleeping, so in that sleep he did not remember that he should not come out naked. Unfortunately, his naked limbs are seen and Urvashi goes away. So this is a separation, but Sri Aurobindo sees something more than that. What happens is that Pururavas now goes to heaven pleading for return of Urvashi. The condition that was given by the heavenly gods, the Indra and all of them is that instead of she going back to earth, why don't you come and join us in heaven? I'll give you a place here. So he agrees for that. So Pururavas goes to heaven. What is the theme? That here death has won. Pururavas has abandoned earth. Remember that word. Because Sri Aurobindo is not the one who abandons. So he put it aside, he said, this doesn't serve my purpose. Love and death, similar story. There we have the same question of Ruru and Priyavada. Priyavada with the snake bite, she also dies early. And then Ruru goes in search of her. Ultimately the solution is, when he goes to Patala Loka, the idea is, you part with half of your life, then will return Priyavada. And Ruru accepts it. What Sri Aurobindo sees is, here again there is a victory of death because half the life is sacrificed. So it doesn't so sure. It's in Savitri that we see a fulfillment of Sri Aurobindo's own dream, own wish to the conquest of death. And in this conquest we see Savitri and Satyavan as a new symbol where love can conquer death. The first reason is he chose that. He chose this theme of love, Savitri and Satyavan. And now if I can take you to your question of what are the differences. See, when Sri Aurobindo picked up this story, obviously he saw great differences, not only the theme, but as he mentions, it's a great symbolic story. So what Sri Aurobindo has done is brought out the symbolism. Now this is interesting to see. Of course, when you go to what are the differences, there are plenty of differences. Each author, each critic has brought out his own ways of looking at it. But the first and the simplest difference I would say is, look at the great length of the book, of the epic. I was reading the English translation of Mahabharata story, I don't know Sanskrit. And there are hardly 700 verses. And which have been expanded by Sri Aurobindo to 24,000 lines almost. So immediately when you see the story and the books in front of you, this is a massive epic and a small story. In that you will see another thing that I found recently was,
do you think something is hidden in those names?
I'll come to that. In fact, that's the next point I was going to tell you. That Sri Aurobindo. Now one more thing before that. What I was surprised is, in the original story of Mahabharata, the tapasya of Ashwapati is given in 10 lines. And Sri Aurobindo it takes 10,000 lines. So imagine the extension, the expansion Sri Aurobindo brings in. Obviously, he has not expanded it because he was a poet, he knew how to do imagination. All that expansion is only his own experience. So for him, there's nothing to imagine what do I say next. It's all pouring out of his own inner experience. So that is one thing that shocks anybody to see where Sri Aurobindo comes in as the difference of the original and the Sri Aurobindo second. Now coming to your suggestion, what about the names? In fact, that's the central thesis, but the central point we should remember about the names, because Sri Aurobindo himself has written a note on Savitri. Those of you who have read that, you know. I mean, I don't know what is the circumstances, maybe we should read more. To whom and when did he write that note? Because that note reveals the entire secret of Savitri. And I, for one, believe once you know the symbolism of the names, the characters of Savitri, you understand how to do it. Otherwise, people will not understand what it is all about. Just a story or a myth or imagination. In the names, I've seen there are 3 levels we can analyze. One is the names on the mythological level, on the psychological level, on the spiritual level, and on the supernatural level. So that's why I'm emphasizing the names are not just names. How much Sri Aurobindo has brought in those names. To take the mythological thing, as he writes, Satyavan is the soul that has come down into ignorance and got trapped by death. And Deliverance is one who has lost his vision. And Savitri, of course, is the descent of the Divine Mother, who has come to save the earth. And Ashwapati is the tapas, the Lord of tapas. Now these names are just signifying these things that we are saying, Lord of tapas, because all these are obvious. Savitri is the avatar. What's great about it? The greater thing is, when we see that, we get a little greater hint in the 4 boons that are asked by Savitri. You see, you have to link up all this, then we understand. Savitri asks Yama, oh yeah, Yama, let me tell you, Yama. There's one more difference. There's no Yama in Sri Aurobindo Savitri. I don't know why, but it's very obviously. Because death for Sri Aurobindo is not a god. It is a negation of our life. And it is also written when we take up the question of the great Vedic prayer, Asatoma Satkamaya. The last one is Mrityorma Amritam Kamaya. So this search for death and immortality is just in the beginning. But later on, this death was given the figurehead of Yama. When we come to the Purana Tantric age where there are a lot of gods who are invented. And Sri Aurobindo doesn't want Yama to be a god. Because in fact, Yama is not a god. If you go to the end of it, Book 11, etc., you will see Yama is the supreme. He is the supreme divine himself, put on a mask for the sake of evolution. So Sri Aurobindo doesn't give him an excessive or an extra godhood. He says he is the supreme. But in this evolution, in this creation, there are always the divine forces and the opposing forces for the sake of evolution. So Indian mythology has been very clever to say he has given the mask and called him a Yama, but Sri Aurobindo doesn't call him Yama. However, he takes the essential part of it. Now coming to the Yama part, what are the 4 boons that Savitri asked from him? It's very interesting. First of all, she says, O Lord Yama, give back the sight and the kingdom to my father-in-law, Vimatsena. Or more suppose, no. Second one, he says, give to my father-in-law, Ashwapati, 100 sons. Fine. Yama agrees for that also. Third one, he says, to Satyavan and myself, be women children. So there, of course, in the Mahava story is a kind of a catch-22. Yama says, all right, then she says, how can I have children without my partner? So he's forced to give back Satyavan. But what Sri Aurobindo sees is a different thing. I mean, that's what is miraculous in Sri Aurobindo, how he broadens the whole meaning. He says, why was this Vimatsena first asked for a new vision? It's a new vision of life and understanding. It's not getting back his sight. Sight is not just the eyes. So Sri Aurobindo says, let him get a new vision of life. And a new vision of life is the new supramental vision. The new consciousness vision, not the old mental vision going back. So that's the first thing that is required for a new world, a new vision is required. Now, number one. Secondly, we see Ashwapati, he is being given 100 children. Not one son, but Savitri asked for many more children. What is that to do? Now, Ashwapati getting children means he is not getting a number of sons and daughters, but the inner meaning is Ashwapati is tapas, tapasya. So in Sri Aurobindo and the mother they explain, mother in one of her conversations she says, for the new supramental manifestation, even before the consciousness comes in, what is much more important is the force of the Superman to descend. There was a magnificent talk in this agenda where she says, without the force occupying this world first, if the consciousness alone comes first, it will be destroyed because by the opposing forces. So Mother is very emphatic that first the supramental force must manifest so that it can guard against all these ills, all the anti-divine forces. So there comes our Ashwapati. First the new vision, next the tapasya, the supramental force that comes in. And then there is children of Savitri and Satyavan. Savitri and Satyavan, they are the children of the new race. Because for that, children of the new race, there's got to be the union of Savitri, incarnate the new force, and Satyavan. And the last one, the life of Satyavan, returning, is returning the new supramental consciousness. So there we see now the meaning coming out, the symbolism. So this is what your question is these four names for Sri Aurobindo in this great depth. And one more thing I should not leave here without telling about the mother. Mother brings in a new element. She doesn't go by these names. But this is what I call the spiritual meaning of Savitri. She says it is the daily record of the person who has written it. And very obvious, we have all read from Sri Aurobindo's letters that he has used Savitri as his ascended order. So the daily record. Next he says is the complete system of yoga for those who want to follow Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga. Third one is the yoga of the earth. And again the massive earth and human consciousness evolving. And the last one she would say is, the Divine Mother adapting herself to this body. That's what the yoga that she has done. So she has brought in the differences, and you can see we don't have to elaborate more than this on the entire Savitri differences.
That was wonderful, Anandala, and in fact, I learned a lot. It's a great revision for me, and we have some time for the questions. Questions from the audience?
Yes.
Yes.
These four names, Satyavan, Vimuksena, Samati, Savitri, is there something related to each of us? Something? Is there any connection? Four names, Satyavan, Savitri, Vimuksena, Samati. What is the relation in us, within us?
Yeah.
Individual.
Yeah, relation to human being.
Yeah.
Human personality.
Yes.
Well, Sri Aurobindo calls them as incarnations, as personalities who come down to take birth and human qualities. But I do not see directly any relation with the present human being. It is not that Ashwapati is my vital tapasya or the Vimuksena is my mental vision. They are too far off. It's like comparing an avatar to a human being. Avatar may be having mental, vital, physical, etc. But his consciousness or her consciousness is too vast and too high to bring it down to the human level. So I would not relate them to any human personality.
Well, there is one question left. Any question for the theory part to Dr. Shalini? So with this theory, aesthetics, etc. Any question from the audience or our young speaker?
Excuse me. Yes. I was curious because Auroville used Paradise Lost as a very important foundation for his poetic career and studies. Whether the Not of Savitri is a complement to what he felt was missing perhaps in how Milton addressed this capture of paradise.
He is speaking of Milton's influence on Savitri.
Major?
Milton's
Milton's
influence. Savitri.
Milton's Paradise Lost.
Paradise Lost. Do you want to answer? What?
Paradise Lost. Here I want to add one thing first. When we talk about Sri Aurobindo's poetics, we always say it is anti-intellectual. This is a very common belief. Now, yes, it is intuitive, but in one or two letters to Setna, written around 1934, what he says that intellect gives us an idea, and then we move from intellect to intuition. So at some point we have to combine, like intellect at the beginning give us the idea, and then we move from intellect to intuition. And that Milton's Paradise Lost has a sweeping impact, and it is allusive, it is based on an allusion, and allusive style is there in Savitri. So you are right in your observation that allusive style is there. Another thing I forgot to mention, that is also an addition to Anandada's discourse, there was a thematic discussion on Savitri. Now when we talk about the stylistic aspect of Savitri, we find a very interesting feature, that expanded metaphor. That symbol or the metaphor is being expanded, as Anandada mentioned, at 10,000 lines. It is going on and on. So that technique actually comes from Arthur Simon's The Symbolist Movement. He says that an entire text can be based on a single metaphor. One can expand it, and it travels, and by virtue of our conscious progressive realization or progressive evolution of consciousness, this metaphor will actually expand. So that is why that influence is there. Allusive style and the idea part, it is there, and that cadence, sweeping impact.
And also, it was not just Milton. Sri Aurobindo was, in his memory, all the European poets at the time. And he was synthesizing them together in the context of his new thing. And there are stylistic references, stylistic allusions, we call it allusions, as T.S. Eliot has explained in his essay, Tradition and Individual Talent, that there must be a historical sense. Without the historical sense, a writer cannot be creative. You are not imitating, you are just reminding them. In Bengali we say, Hrithik Ghatak, the great film director, he once said, এমন একটি ভাষা হবে যেটি মনে পড়িয়ে দেবে যেটা রেফারেন্সে ভারাক্রান্ত হবে না। I translate it. এমন একটি ভাষা হবে যেটি রেফারেন্সে ভারাক্রান্ত হবে না, যেটি মনে পড়িয়ে দেবে। A language which will not be burdened by references, but which will just remind. That is what Sri Aurobindo does when he uses a phrase from Milton, from Wordsworth, from Shelley, from Keats. That is why he is writing something new in the context, as Ananda has explained, that it's a totally new thing. It speaks of a new creation on earth, a new species. And it is a yoga. This poem is, the whole poem is a yoga.
One more
Could you repeat the name? Sorry, you mentioned Arthur. There was a name that you just
Arthur Symons.
Arthur Symons, the symbolist movement in literature.
That came out in 1899.
1899, yes. One thing we must remember here, that in the Western poetics, among the Romantics, because Sri Aurobindo has mentioned the Romantic poets in the future poetry and called them the poets of the dawn. Now the Romantic poets in the Biographia Literaria and in lyrical ballads, they say that poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful emotions. But what they missed is the aspect of self-discovery. So that is not there. Even in Paradise Lost also, you will not find this element of self-discovery, which is there in Sri Aurobindo's poetics and also in practice.
I quote from Milton. I quote Sri Aurobindo on Milton. Milton's structure is not seen, but thought out. Sri Aurobindo says in the future poetry, Milton's structures are not seen, but thought out. So we come to the end of the session, and many thanks to the two speakers. I hope you have enjoyed the session, and it's a nice feeling meeting my mentor, Dr. Anand Reddy, after a long time, and he was my mentor, and we traveled together, we lived together, we used the same blade shaving in Delhi, and even I taught for Sakar also for a time. Thank you.
So you are your mentor and your student.
Yes, mentor and mentee.
So thank you very much, our dear guests, for your sharing, and we will not let you go without accepting small mementos from us. Dr. Ananda Reddy. Dr. Sharani Mandal Ghoshal. And the moderator of the present session, Dr. Gautam Ghoshal. Thank you very much. And